Naruto Shippuden ends with the Fourth Shinobi World War, a devastating conflict that ends with over 40,000 villagers losing their lives. But there's an entire war in the series that we almost never hear about, a conflict that shaped shinobi warfare, and was the first of its kind after the creation of the 5 great nations. In today's video, we'll explore the stories that would be covered if a Naruto spin-off was made about the very first Shinobi World War. To understand the first Shinobi World War, we need to go back to the beginning. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha were 2 legendary shinobi who grew up during the brutal Warring States period and had a shared dream, to create a village where children wouldn't have to die on the battlefield. The Senju and Uchiha clans had been warring against each other for their entire histories, but Madara and Hashirama put their differences aside and founded Konohagakure, the Hidden Leaf Village. Thanks to these two, this revolutionary idea spread across the ninja world, with others like the Sand, Mist, Cloud, and Stone villages following suit. You cannot overstate this achievement, as the Warring States period was just pure chaos, with clans constantly fighting for dominance over their neighbors. Now, village loyalty took precedence over blood disputes, meaning that shinobi conflicts were drastically reduced. But here's where things get interesting, because Hashirama and Madara had very different philosophies about how to achieve lasting peace. Hashirama believed in cooperation and unity, and this philosophy would become known as the Will of Fire, which emphasized that everyone in the village was part of one large family that should protect each other. He thought that the path to lasting peace was distributing power equally among the villages by sharing the tailed beast and fostering mutual respect. Madara, on the other hand, was less trusting of his neighbors and believed that peace was achieved through strength and dominance. He felt that true peace would only be achieved if one village held absolute power over all others, and once demanded that Iwagakure be subservient to Konohagakure. What happened next would literally reshape the shinobi landscape, as Madara returned with the Nine Tails under his control, determined to destroy the village he helped create. The battle between Hashirama and Madara was so catastrophic that it carved out what we know as the Valley of the End. Throughout the battle, Hashirama tried desperately to reason with his former friend, but Madara fought until he was completely exhausted. In the end, Hashirama was victorious, and thought that he had killed Madara. We now know that he survived using Izanagi, but the world believed that he was dead, and 2 massive statues were erected at the valley to commemorate this legendary battle. After defeating Madara, Hashirama worked tirelessly to maintain peace, and convened the first ever Kage Summit, bringing together leaders from all 5 great nations for the first time. His plan was to distribute the tailed beast that Konoha had captured among the other villages, creating a balance of power that would prevent any single nation from dominating the others. But here's where things started to unravel. Sunagakure already possessed the one-tailed Shukaku. The first Kazekage suggested that since the other villages had more to gain, Suna should receive an additional payment, including a portion of Konoha's fertile land, and 30% of whatever each nation had to pay for their tailed beasts. The other Kage objected, saying these demands were too high, but Reito was unwavering, and threatened not to sign the agreement if his demands were not met. Thankfully, Hashirama was able to mediate the conflict before it got too out of hand, and the first 5 Kage Summit ended with a peaceful treaty being signed. However, this didn't really put an end to the tensions between the villages, and Takigakure village even tried to assassinate Hashirama by sending Kakuzu. Ultimately, proper peace wasn't achieved during Hashirama's lifetime, and he appointed his brother Tobirama as the second Hokage before passing away. Tobirama was pragmatic, where Hashirama was idealistic, and was suspicious of others, particularly the Uchiha clan. Hashirama ensured an era of peace within Konoha for a few years by establishing the Konoha Military Police Force and the Ninja Academy. But even his efforts couldn't stop what was coming, and the First Shinobi War erupted, plunging the world into chaos not seen since the end of the Warring States period. The strange thing about this war was that there was no direct trigger for it. The entire shinobi world went to war over resources, with hidden villages taking resources from others. The tailed beast distribution had failed to create the balance of power Hashirama envisioned, and instead introduced more powerful weapons to the war. Unlike the Fourth War, which had clear alliance structures, the First Shinobi World War was a chaotic conflict with battles on multiple fronts. Temporary alliances formed and dissolved, while villages fought opportunistically based on resource needs. During the war, Tobirama still worked tirelessly to establish peace, even putting his life at risk when he visited Kumogakure to meet the second Raikage. The Gold and Silver brothers, Kinkaku and Ginkaku, attempted to stage a coup d'etat by simultaneously taking out the Hokage and the Raikage. While Tobirama and the Raikage were able to escape with their lives, the peace discussions were cut short once again. This is actually a critical point in the First World War, as a few months afterward, Tobirama's team was ambushed by Kumogakure's elite Kinkaku force. Honorable to the end, Tobirama sacrificed himself by acting as a decoy to allow his team to escape, and appointed Hiruzen Sarutobi as the third Hokage. But it wasn't only Konoha that lost its kages to the First Shinobi War. One of the most famous battles of this era was between the second Mizukage and the second Tsuchikage. Not much is known about the battle between Gengetsu and Mu, but we do know the outcome. It was a fight to the death for both of them. That's pretty much all the confirmed major deaths of the First World War, and there were surely thousands of shinobi deaths on top of that as well. But how exactly did the war end? Well, the most commonly accepted theory is that none of the 5 great nations could actually win the war. This meant that after years of fighting, every major village had depleted its economic resources and the successive battles were causing irreplaceable infrastructure damage. But that's not really enough to explain why all the nations would come to the negotiating table once more. One possibility is that Hiruzen Sarutobi was the key figure behind brokering a new peace deal. As Tobirama's student and Hashirama's apprentice, Hiruzen embodied the will of fire as well, and was often criticized for being too kind and welcoming to his neighbors. It's possible that Hiruzen, having witnessed the horrors of war and his master's sacrifice, led diplomatic efforts that convinced the other kage to end the fighting, even if the agreements were disadvantageous to Konoha. Another interesting theory is that while the 5 great nations were destroying each other, other smaller nations like the Hidden Sound or Rain villages slowly gained power and influence. They may have formed coalitions and threatened the larger nations, forcing them to stop fighting each other to address threats from unexpected quarters. While it's still not entirely clear what caused the hidden villages to put their differences aside, what we do know is that the First Shinobi War eventually ended with an armistice treaty that established 20 years of peace between the 5 great nations. After the war, Konoha established the Memorial Stone, engraving the names of all ninja who died in the village's service, a tradition that continues to this day. All countries were badly damaged and devastated by the conflict, but the more concerning outcome is that the combat tactics developed during the war were still preserved. Think about it, the Kinkaku force was able to threaten Tobirama's team even though he had the support of the likes of Danzo, Hiruzen, and Kagami. Every single village had their own elite combat units with deadly jutsu to boot, and this level of combat readiness would continue to shape ninja warfare for generations. So while the armistice seemed successful on the surface, the 2 decades without major warfare was a fragile peace built on exhaustion rather than mutual understanding. During this time, the villages rebuilt their military strength and never stopped their strategic positioning and intelligence-gathering operations. Even though the nations conducted diplomatic missions and held Chunin exams together, the arms race continued in secret, setting the stage for the Second Shinobi World War. Our spin-off would end by showing how the armistice only created a fragile peace and failed to address the root causes of the First Shinobi War. Tsunagakure still wanted fertile land, and the border tensions between the nations remained unresolved. And you can't really blame them for that either, as they got the worst deal of the unequal resource distribution between nations. A bit less reasonably, many villages still had conflicting philosophies about power, peace, and governance, meaning that military expansionist factions would always have a voice. But most importantly, nothing was done to heal the generational trauma of the First World War, meaning that children who lost parents to the war grew up with hatred and a desire for revenge. All these unresolved tensions erupted into the Second Shinobi World War roughly 20 years after the First War ended. The Second War marked an evolution, as we would see more organized alliance structures, and even more devastating techniques being employed by the shinobi. But here's the tragedy. None of it was necessary. Hashirama's original vision of genuine cooperation and shared prosperity wasn't entirely impractical, and could have prevented so much bloodshed. The First Shinobi War wasn't inevitable, but it required the Senju and Uchiha clans to lead by example. Madara's betrayal diminished all hope of peace between the villages, and opened the door for greed, suspicion, and distrust to wreak havoc on the shinobi world. So what do you think? Would you watch a First Shinobi World War spin-off? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.